what you missed when you didn't exist. I am Corbett, and I am 53.
And I'm Lucy, and I am 24, different than before.
Going for the rhyme
I was
every
I,
time. Ah!
trying it out. We'll see how it goes.
Actually, we have a special guest also. My sister Sam, not because of nepotism, but because she is an expert. Well, she works. She has a job, and it revolves directly around what I was going to talk about today.
Hey. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on board. And actually, we're talking about movies. Movies, it's Oscar season. I'm sure everybody at this point has seen the Oscars and whatever shocking thing happened this year.
Did you not watch it, Dad?
I did not.
Dude, there was so
Oh my
much
gosh.
drama.
So much
So
already?
much drama. But that's for the second half. You do your thing.
Oh,
First
okay.
half.
This one is one that happened in 1973. Probably one of the first big upsets at the Oscars, at least that I remembered hearing about. And this is really sort of an after effect because I was only 2. I wasn't going, "Ooh, who's the Oscar winner?" I was, playing with Legos and shoving things up my nose. But later on, I did kind of get the gist of all this and how it happened. Specifically, the big shock isn't that somebody got slapped or somebody wore the wrong dress or whatever. It was the fact that somebody turned down an Oscar win. Marlon Brando, the winner for the best actor for The Godfather, which is one of those penultimate movies, sent in a Native American woman, Sacheen Littlefeather? I want to say Littlefeather. It's not her birth name, actually. It was originally Mary Cruz or Marie Cruz. She was a Native American who was the Apache. She was adopted into the Apache tribe, and she represented the Affirmative Image Committee. They were trying to make sure that Native Americans were given a positive reinforcement look. Because in most movies and television shows, especially up to the 70s, I will say the Native Americans are pretty much window dressing. They show up cartoonesque style, just broken English, and they were more of a, hey, the cowboys got to shoot somebody. That was what they went with. Anyway, her protest is actually so short. I sent you both a link for this, and it was about a minute long. Roger Moore and I forget who the other person was. They made an announcement like, this is the person who won. She comes up in full native garb, says Marlon Brando's not going to accept this, and she holds up her hand before they give her the award. She says he has refused the award on the grounds of the treatment of Native Americans portrayal in Hollywood. She held up a 8-page speech and said she's not going to read this because it's far too long. I found out later, actually doing a little research on this, she was told before she was even allowed to go up that she was not going to read this. So it wasn't her benevolent niceness. It was the fact that they were going to arrest her if she read it on stage. She did read it afterwards. And it's a pretty long letter. And also, she wasn't allowed to touch the trophy. So she wasn't just being nice and holding up her hand and not accept it. She was told, like, these 2 things. If you do those things, we're going to arrest you. Off camera, John Wayne was being held at bay, and she says he was being held at bay by 6 guards. I've seen the video footage. It's actually about 3, but it's basically really just one guy kind of holding him back. Don't go up there. He was trying to get up there to stop her from saying, I'm not going to accept this. So kind of a jerk move by John Wayne. I think it wasn't until 2023 that the Academy acknowledged the way she was treated and apologized.
That's crazy. That's so late.
Yeah, a little bit.
What is this world?
I know there was some buildup at the time because there was a protest at Wounded Knee that became an occupation, like for several weeks or months. It feels like it was a while. Which Wounded Knee is like a tiny town in South Dakota. It was also the site of Wounded Knee was
the site of a major massacre in 1890.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what having a history professor around is handy for, or in this case, an archaeologist.
And those are different because...
Well, okay, sorry. I should go back to the point that the reason why Sam is here is because she works with most of the Native Americans in Utah and deals with them in a very direct way to make sure to secure artifacts and preserve their culture and history and teach it. I know your expertise does not really cover the South Dakota Native American tribes, but I presume you can still acknowledge some of what was happening with all of this.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on with just in the background of all of this. There was the American Indian movement that started in 1968. Of course, that was right at the time of the civil rights movement and other protests and things at that time. But what came before the Wounded Knee protest was a protest at Alcatraz Island, and it was in 1969. It was a 19-month occupation, mostly college students, Native American college students. People are like, why would they even take over Alcatraz? It was a prison, or whatever. But the prison was at that time closed down, and they were about to transition that piece of property to the Park Service. And so the students were like, well, we're going to make this a protest. The American Indian movement students, right? We're going to go and occupy the island because this is native land and this is part of a broken treaty from the past. And so that was kind of the point of doing it there. The same thing with Wounded Knee in 1973. It was that was native land. That was where they chose to do that protest to also bring out the point of broken treaties.
But that is basically the first time that the U.S. has ever broken a treaty with the Indians, so really,
Right.
no big deals, really.
Right. And I say that, I mean, those are just two examples of the resistance that was happening right then. There was many other examples at that time and many more before and following. If you want to go forward in time to 2015 at Standing Rock, the protest for the Dakota Access Pipelines.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
think a lot of people were just like, well, why are these Native people so upset? It's just water, it's not like you need it to be clean. I know.
Oh, boy.
That year of resistance there was also really important because that land was reservation land, and the pipeline going through there was a direct violation of the Fort Laramie treaties of 1851, 1868, which said that the Sioux were to be able to have that land undisturbed. They were supposed to be able to live there undisturbed, and yeah. So they were being disturbed by that pipeline because, having worked on pipelines, I know that they do break. They have cracks. That's why they have inspectors on them. And so the potential of a pipeline cracking and leaking into the water supply it's really imminent. So anyway, that's just a little teeny quick glance at some of these protests and what was happening then, what's happened in recent years, and why they even did that at the Oscars.
Yeah. Thinking about it, it's interesting in the sense that I think after this, Native American portrayals were improved, at least a little bit. I mean, I certainly looked great in Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner film in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and several others where they're portrayed, very prominently and strong. I will say though, the old Western, The Magnificent Seven, that predominantly had Mexican people because it was filmed in Mexico, and the Mexican government allowed them to film in Mexico if they made the one caveat that all Mexican citizens would be in pure white and perfectly clean. And it's the one thing that doesn't make a lot of sense if you see it. And this is the Mexican people wanting to be portrayed this way. Doesn't match up with the way they probably would have looked in the 1800s. But all the bad guys, of course, were the banditos, the warlord who was terrorizing this town. So it made for a really interesting look, even though it wasn't a very realistic look, because you had the pure white clothing on these perfectly clean Mexican families, running in fear from the dirty, gritty banditos who are also Mexican citizens. So I think that portrayal was a bit cartoonish in a way, but it also made it look iconic for what it was. And I'm not saying that the Native Americans need that kind of treatment, but at the same time, they are people, from what I've heard. So they have goods and bads involved in it. I know my dad would tell me all about these horror stories of the terrible things that the Native Americans would do to U.S. soldiers who were attacking them. And the thing is, they were attacking them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, Dad actually, in his later years, he actually started reading a lot of other books, and I had a lot of conversations with him about this because I kind of saw his perception change over time as he got hold of new information, new research, and new perspectives that were being written about in books. Because just like film, earlier accounts of the Battle of Little Bighorn and those kind of things were all glorifying Custer and all this kind of stuff. But then later on, we actually look at the archaeology. One of my professors did the archaeology of the battlefield of Little Bighorn and discovered that the account that was given by the soldiers at that time didn't match what they actually found on the ground. And it actually matched better what was told through oral tradition through Native Americans.
Hmm.
The archaeology kind of told on the written record early on. And so I guess I'm just bringing that up because I think that as we gain new knowledge, as we do more research, then we have an opportunity to change our perspective. And I think that happens in film too, which is what you just said, that we're seeing some awareness now. I don't know if it was necessarily because of what she did at the Oscars, but kind of that whole collective movement, I guess, is helping because we are starting to see more realistic portrayals and definitely actual Native American actors in these roles.
Yeah, very true. Well, and Littlefeather actually passed away in 2022. I think she was at a ceremony. That was one of the big wins for, I think, South Dakota or North Dakota. I forget now. I was reading through the articles this morning, and she came up to give a speech and basically said, "Well, it took us 50 years, but we got here." So, now that we're living in the future and everything's great, Lucy, what were the Oscars like?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's kind of what Sam's been talking about, how it's all about changing that mindset and changing the perspectives on how we portray people in media. And I feel like I've said this before, but we've been getting so many more voices in media, in movies and films and TV shows and everything else. Because, like, even as a kid, I could still see some of that because we'd watch Peter Pan and we'd watch, the old westerns whenever we'd go to like the Dairy Queen. You had the Native Americans who were considered the savages, and they just weren't able to become modern and educated until the white man came in and colonized them and made their lives quote unquote better. It's just nice to see in the future that we are slowly embracing these cultures as we move forward. I wish that more films focused on Native stories were more, I guess, appreciated and noticed, but I think that's just going to take some time because I feel like they've been more of the silent protesters for the most part, or they get mostly ignored by media. I think as of right now, we see more African and Black voices as well as some Latinx voices. And I think they're getting most of the media attention right now. And I think that the Native voices are a bit more quiet, even though they all deserve to be heard as equals. But,
One of the last sentences I remember reading was the Native Americans make up 2% of the American population. So, yeah, they're going to get kind of stomped on as far as being able to stand up for much.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad. It's almost like trying to preserve a people.
Yeah, we did kind of wipe them out with the initial
Everything.
colonization of America.
A little bit.
Which is rather unfortunate.
Well, actually, Sam, you were talking about anthropology at one point earlier. You actually are out trying to preserve a lot of this. Are you or anybody having any luck preserving a people?
I guess I'm not understanding that question.
That just seems like a whole lot. Like, could you just, as an archaeologist, you go and save artifacts so you can, preserve this artifact and put it in a museum, a la Indiana Jones. But I mean, you get to preserve the artifacts, and you've done that for years.
Right.
But like, I know you've been trying to preserve a lot of the like native stories and stuff. You've done recordings.
I guess I want to say here that all my friends from different tribes, I've heard this so many times, and I guess I'll repeat it, but they all say the same thing, and that is, we are still here. Someone else was talking to me about this earlier, is that there's some kind of mythological thing about native peoples, indigenous peoples to North America, I'll just say. I mean, but really everywhere in the world. And that somehow they are just not here anymore. Like somehow they actually are just vanished. And that just absolutely is not true. I think that on the East Coast, you maybe don't realize that you're surrounded by other indigenous people because maybe there's just been more blending in, and because like what Lucy said, there was just so much going on in the colonial period to wipe out these people. And I mean, just a very blatant effort to wipe these people out or assimilate them. So if you become Christian and you live in these little communities and you farm and all this kind of stuff, the silly thing is that pretty much all of the indigenous people living on the East Coast at that time did farm. In fact, I haven't studied a group of people from the past that didn't farm in some way, unless it was, during the archaic period or something, which is like 8,000 years ago in this part of the world anyway. So I guess that's what I would say, is that they aren't mythical beings. There are indigenous people all around everywhere. I have the blessing to live near a reservation and work with people from the tribe here all the time, the Southern Paiutes, and I have many friends and love them dearly and cherish all those relationships. And so I know that's not the case for everyone, but rest assured that there are indigenous people in every place you go in this country. You just may not know it. And it's because, like, kind of what we've talked about with the movies, maybe they are not dressed like you think they should be dressed, right? You're expecting Pocahontas or something to get out of the taxi. That was something that there's been a couple of authors that address this. Vine Deloria and his son, Philip Deloria, he wrote a book called Indians in Unexpected Places. And he addresses these things chapter by chapter. He's like, natives in sports, natives in movies, starting back with the Buffalo Bill Cody show and all that kind of stuff. I think what happened was in the early 1900s, there was this effort to, put natives into boarding schools, and there was a specific effort to assimilate them into white society so that they would become white in every way, and they would have to completely be stripped of their culture, their songs, their language, their hair even. And so that effort, was really to squelch out their cultures altogether. And so that may be part of why Philip wrote that book, is because then all of a sudden in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, when you have Native Americans working alongside white people building battleships and all kinds of stuff, it's like, wait, I didn't expect you to be there. Wait, you look like me or whatever, and you're not wearing a headdress. So it's kind of this, you see what I mean?
That is confusing.
Yeah, it's really confusing. Because I thought we had assimilated you, you know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, but you are Indian. Okay.
Well, they hold a certain amount of representation, because
Right.
at the same time, the 70s is when they had the anti-pollution campaign with Eagle Eyes Cody. That was his real name, or it was his Indian name. But he was a Native American actor, basically is an Indian who cries at pollution, which was actually put out because of, well, people wanted to be aware, like, hey, you're destroying the land. Don't do that. It's pretty sad when you have to put out a commercial. Hey, remember that place you live? Don't trash it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that was something that I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking, oh, so, well, I guess, yeah, you're right. You see Eagle Eyes Cody's in full dress,
Yeah.
Full buckskin, feathered headdress, the whole bit. And yeah, it's you expect that, maybe with a tie.
With a tie?
I don't know. This is him in the business world.
Well, and I think think that's really the distinction right there, is that when someone is wearing their regalia, which is kind of this thing that maybe people are looking for. So when someone is wearing their regalia, they're at a specific celebration, or they're at some kind of event, and they're wearing that clothing for a reason. It's tradition, it's part of their culture and heritage. But when that same person goes to work the next morning, maybe they do wear a tie and a dress shirt because they work at the city offices, or they're an attorney, and I think that was the point that Philip Deloria was trying to make in Indians in Unexpected Places, is that there's this distinction between my culture and tradition and religion and what I'm doing for a profession, or I got to take the bus to my job, or I've got to, guess what? I'm Native and I'm a human, and I have to function in this world, and I can be anything.
See, I've seen it from the opposite perspective, because I've had like a pageant sister of mine and someone I went to college with both grew up in different tribes, and I wish I knew which tribes they were in specifically, but they have always tried to include some form of their culture into their dress and their everyday wear. And even like on, granted, I guess the pageant circuit is a little bit different, but I know that that pageant sister that I had, she is in an office job right now, and she always tries to wear a little bit of jewelry or just find some way to represent her tribe. She lives up in Spokane, Washington somewhere. And then the girl that I knew in college, she is actually getting her PhD in Native American Studies and going to law school at the same time. She's like avidly trying to fight for stuff. But she also all the time tries to make sure to represent her tribe in some form. So I think it's a weird contrast, because at some point you're trying to assimilate into society to help be, I guess, quote unquote, normal and accepted, but you're also trying to represent yourself in a way that, I guess, kind of disproves the mythology of existence. Almost.
It's a very American thing to do, honestly. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who are like, they're regular red-blooded Americans, and they're like, oh, I'm Irish. I'm Irish, and I'm proud of being Irish and American. It's a certain amount of I think that was, as a kid, there was one of the Schoolhouse Rock songs or something that was the Great American Melting Pot. And I didn't quite get it when I was really young, but I got it later on. Like, okay, so everything kind of goes into one big goo. And we all have identities, and both racial and religious and heritage-based identities that we cling to kind of form our own unique self. But at the same time, it puts us in a grouping, which is kind of American.
Yeah, I agree with what Lucy was saying too, because I think that I definitely see that where my friends will wear very distinct earrings or a necklace or a certain pattern or a ribbon skirt at events. I mean, you see that with Lily Gladstone last year in the Oscars. She had a very lovely dress, but she had intermingled into her dress certain patterns, like indigenous style patterns in her dress, as well as like Deb Haaland, previous Secretary of the Interior. She often wore ribbon skirts and different types of clothing to represent her heritage.
It's cool. It is a very American thing to be so upfront with your identity. Mm-hmm. It is so weird.
Mm-hmm. And more so now, I would say, with Native peoples, just because, like I said, earlier in the 1900s, you kind of didn't want to be identified as Native because there was such a negative connotation on that. And so I think it was really after World War II that there started to be some kind of change with that. And then, of course, the topic that we were looking at, in the 60s and 70s, there started to be that movement building towards Indigenous identity and reclaiming that and making those kinds of statements. So we haven't solved it yet. I can definitely say that, but I am heartened by seeing these new actors, new writers, new producers that are Native. You're seeing these new shows like Res Dogs and Res Ball and, all kinds of things. And that's really bringing these Indigenous artists to the forefront, which has never really happened.
That's all good stuff.
Yeah.
So, hope everybody has fun watching the Oscars this year. Hopefully, there is not nearly as much drama as in the past. But this has been What You Missed When You Didn't Exist.
Take the time to embrace your identity because you are welcome and you are loved and appreciated, and it may not be in the present, but it will be appreciated in due time.
Well said. And thanks for being here, Lucy. And Sam. Right. Somebody's
here. I'm hearing the voices again.